I'm Andrew Willett for A Pro Basketball Show. Follow and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, as well as following on social media at APBShow on Twitter and Instagram. Be sure to follow me as well at TheACWillett22. Thank you so much for tuning in, and without further ado, hello and welcome to A Pro Basketball Show. I am so excited today to talk about a team that's really been taking me by surprise over the last month and a half of the season, and that's the Minnesota Lynx. And to do so, I've brought on none other than Mitchell Hansen. Mitchell does a lot of great work hosting, writing, social media over at Winsider. Hitting the hardwood, that a great podcast he's got going with both the Timberwolves and the Lynx over in Minnesota, and just doing great work all around this summer covering the WNBA. Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Hey, good. Thank you for having me. Happy to join, and it's good to chat a little Lynx basketball again.
Exactly. Yeah, we had you on for the preseason, so we're right around midseason. It's been too long, really, since I've talked Minnesota. So, and a team that really, for the type of basketball that I liked, I've been talking about this pretty recently, where I like really switchy teams, a lot of wins, a lot of forwards. That's the Minnesota Lynx, and right now they're kind of finding a formula from the looks of it. But Mitchell, just to get things started out, what's the vibe right now in Minnesota?
It's kind of up and down. Obviously during that 5 game win streak that kind of led up to the All-Star break before they got blown out right in 2 games right before the All-Star break. It was kind of on a high note. Understandably so. They were playing their best basketball of the season, but then they kind of came back down to reality. Played some top opponents in Las Vegas and Dallas, going right into the All-Star break, which kind of brought them back down, like I said, to kind of reality. And but I mean they've continued to dig themselves out of holes, continued to dig themselves out of losing streaks. That's what we saw on July 20th against Las Vegas. Coming out of a 3 game losing streak. They end up beating Las Vegas, sweeping them in the 4 game series, and they appear to be on a high note. So it's just kind of up and down, which is kind of what we expected out of this young team and kind of a rebuilding phase. And they're not the only ones going through it, so they're still right there, and they're back into the playoff picture, which I don't think a lot of people anticipated or expected at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, beginning of the year, I guess we had our talk where it was like, hey, we're coming in here, no Sylvia fouls for the first time, like moving away from kind of the dynasty era Minnesota Lynx, and you've got really no one replacing her at the center spot anywhere close to the likes of Sylvia Fowles, but you've got Nafisa Collier kind of stepping into a role where she hadn't been all this time, and we talked about it in the preseason where like you had the quotes from Nafisa Collier that were like, hey, I think we're going to surprise some people this year. We might be pretty good playing a different type of way. But I mean, when we talked about it, it was like we should maybe lower our expectations, temper our expectations here for this Lynx team. And I think early on in the season, that's what we saw. But like you mentioned, that 5 game winning streak and really bumping up the standings from where they started, I couldn't have expected that in the slightest. So as we get into kind of what's been going on for the Lynx, I want to step back to that early season portion where I believe it was at minimum lost their first 4 games. What were
First 6, yeah.
first 6? Okay, that's what I thought. I wasn't going to go that far if I wasn't certain. That rough sledding. What were some of the problems early on in the season?
It was a mix of youth trying to figure out where all the pieces fit. I know Cheryl Reeve had talked about being able to find their identity. That was something that they struggled to do early on in the year, and you're going to have that when you have a changing of the guard and kind of a new face of the team and new leadership and kind of a new wave of players coming in, as well as the incoming rookies that were coming in playing bigger roles. But they just needed to find that identity. They needed to play together. They needed to build chemistry. And that's what's happened. I know after the July 20th win over Los Angeles that I mentioned before, Cheryl Reeve said that she didn't know if they would win this game early on in the year, just with the lack of chemistry, maybe the lack of relationship building that hadn't taken place yet. And Minnesota's gone through those rough stretches. They've gone through those losses. They've gone through those winnable games that they've lost. And that's how you learn, and that's what they've done so far, and that's kind of resulted in them being able to kind of come out on top in a couple games, and that's been the difference maker so far. And when it comes to, I mean, Nafis Collier's playing at MVP level, but the rookies are stepping up. They're starting to play well together. They're starting to play balanced, and that's a recipe for success. And defense is always something that Minnesota tries to stress too. So that's when that's not there and the offense isn't there, you're not going to win many games. And they need, if the offense isn't there, they need that defense to step up. And they've kind of found that balance at points throughout the year. But like I said, they're a young team and they're still trying to figure things out, and they're going through injuries. So it's been a roller coaster ride, and they're starting to figure things out, and I think it'll continuously improve as the year progresses.
So you mentioned a lot of those like maybe relationships that needed to develop, chemistry that needed to develop on the floor when you have the young leadership. I mean, I was looking at it today. I had no idea Nafisa Collier, only 26 years old right now, going to turn 27 at the later part of this year. Just an unreal talent, but a very young leader as well. So I mean that factors into some of those chemistry problems. Do you think that's really kind of what's been cleaned up to lead to the winning streak, or?
I think mainly just players finding their roles and striving in their roles. Nafis Collier's been consistent all year long, as I mentioned, but Cheryl Reeve has talked about when when they are playing whoever they're playing, especially the top talent in the league, you need another threat. You need somebody else to help out. You need a couple of players to help out. The rookies have stepped up at times. Cale McBride has stepped up at times, but that's kind of been it. And they do miss Jess Shepard, because Jess Shepard was kind of that steady balance 2 fee early on in the year. But they need everybody to pitch in, and it can't just be Fee. You can't. I mean, we look at Seattle and Jewel Lloyd. Jewel Lloyd's leading the league in scoring, and Seattle's the worst team in the league. Like you got to have help that goes along with that best player, and I think that's kind of what's fed into it. And just everybody kind of finding their role and being comfortable with each other, that goes a long way, in coming out on top more often than not.
Before we get into kind of some of those extra pieces helping out, I think we should just take some time as we're talking about the Minnesota Lynx and touch on just the season that Nafisa Collier is having. I think it's close to 22-8 with two and a half assists. I know that much off the top of my head here, and just like doing it every single night on a team that has started to win as of late, prior to the 3-game losing streak before the win. Regardless, like she's been going off for this team, and it was a question of like, could she do this as the number one option on a team? I just don't think that's a question anymore. What kind of questions has she answered? How has she been able to step up as the player that she is today?
Yeah, I mean, she's playing at an MVP caliber level, and now I don't know if she'll win it. I don't know if Drew Lloyd's even going to win it. Being the leading scorer in the league, just because most MVPs are picked from winning teams, and that's Minnesota has a long way to go. Seattle obviously has a long way to go with Drew Lloyd, but she, when it comes to Nafisa Collier and what she's been able to do, she's really done everything. She's done everything, not only offensively but defensively. A lot of her offensive stats are going to get a lot of the publicity and a lot of the talk, as it should be. I mean, she ranks third in the WNBA in scoring, but she's done well defensively too, and that's been a key thing as well. She's kind of been that two-way. She's established into that two-way player a little bit. But she stepped up big in moments when Minnesota needs her most. At the end of games, how many times she stepped up in the fourth quarter? That's something that is a huge stepping stone and huge building block for this team, and it could very well attract somebody to come join her. This offseason, join her and the rest of the team this offseason, and seeing the potential that is in Minnesota. So, like you said, she's still young, she's still learning, she's back fully healthy. And that's a very key thing. And I wrote at Winsider recently. Actually, it just came out as we're recording this podcast, that it's time to start putting her in that MVP conversation, because she is having an MVP year. And like I said, now I don't know if she'll win it, but she deserves to be in that conversation. She's playing like an MVP right now.
Mitchell, I couldn't agree more. I recorded my podcast yesterday for kind of mid-season awards, and hey, I know their teams aren't winning right now. I have Drew Lloyd and Nafisa Tallier 4-5 in MVP at the midway point of the season. Because, like you said, it's going to go to a winning player at the end of the day. But I still think like the seasons that Jewel and Nafisa just have been incredible to watch so far. And it was fun to you mentioned the fourth quarter moments for Nafisa Collier. It's fun to watch her go up against Seattle like that and really come through when this team needed. But no, I think she's just been awesome. And you also touched on kind of looking forward to maybe someone will want to join her. A little sneak peek for where we will get to at the end of this podcast. But one more question on Nafisa. Long term, her showing this improvement to be a number one player on a team and just be able to carry like she has so far. What is that? How does that affect this team's future?
I think it affects the team's future in the way that, it'll get more talent around her once she gets more people around her. That's only going to make her even more talented. If they get another offensive threat, consistent, talented offensive threat by her, that's going to open up the floor for her. And her continued growth. You mentioned that she's still really young. She is. She's only in her fifth season. I don't even count last season as a season because she played in 4 games, so you can technically say it's her fourth season. But she is very young. She will only continue to grow. And this is a big season as far as her development and her development as a leader. And I think, as she continues to kind of go through the motions this year and kind of go through this entire process, that's only going to, continue from here on out, and it'll only continue to grow next season and beyond. But that's huge for the team to have that staple, and then you mix in those rookies who look very good, at the midway point in the season or a little beyond the midway point in the season. So it's a good group and a good core to build around, and I think that Minnesota's a team to watch, moving forward. Maybe not this season, but moving forward, they have a lot of room. They will have a lot of room, cap space this offseason. They have a lot of young talent, and they have Cheryl Reeve at the head of it. So they're going to be a very interesting team to watch moving forward.
Yeah, Nafisa Tallier, this team, we'll touch on them, but yeah, big fans of Nafisa Tallier here at a Pro Basketball Show, proven a lot this season. We'll move on, kind of to continue on with this season before we maybe touch on who would want to pair along with Nafisa Tallier. This season, when I think about the second best player, second most important player on this team, I was a big proponent early on in the season during those struggles where, hey, let's try and play a little bit more through Jessica Shepard and Jess Shepard, trying to get her going. But then I think also what's happened, you mentioned the rookies. I think Diamond Miller, obviously long term, one of the most important players, but even in the short term has stepped up to be just a dynamite player for this team. Second leading scorer, I believe, fourth in rebounding for this team. And having a relatively strong season. The shooting numbers could be a little bit better, but what stood out to you from watching Diamond Miller in year one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Diamond's going to be a really nice complementary piece to Nafisa Collier. Those two kind of going with each other and kind of growing up together is going to be very interesting to watch. Diamond Miller can just take a game over, and she's shown very inconsistent play as you kind of expect out of a rookie. But her aggressiveness, her ability to kind of impact everything. We saw it in the July 20th game against Los Angeles. She had a near triple double. She was just doing everything. She's very active. Her motor's really high, and she has a really good head on her shoulders. And she knows that this isn't where she wants to be. She wants to be beyond this, and she wants to be better. So she will be moving forward the second option for this team, barring what happens in free agency or in the off season. But right now she's the second option. Coming into your point, the season, to your point earlier, I thought it was going to be Jess Shepard until Jess Shepard went down with injuries right away. I think she played in a handful of games, so they've missed her quite a bit. Um, but that has allowed Dorky Juhas, it's allowed Diamond Miller, both of them to step up and grow up really fast. And they've passed that test with flying colors. And back to Diamond Miller, she has shown inconsistencies, like I said, but as the season progresses, as she gets more time, as she gets more looks, that's only going to continue to improve. Cheryl Reeve has talked about throwing her into some situations similar to what she throws Nafisa Collery into at various points in the game. So that'll be interesting to see how she can, kind of take on that role and, to kind of see what she can continue to establish into.
For Diamond Miller, for me, like I've liked her ability to get to the basket. I think she like her handle for her size and strength is very strong. But also like the willingness to shoot the 3-pointer, even when early on in the season it wasn't falling. Even now, I think 25 or so percent. I really do believe in what she can become for this team. I will note like a second best player to Nafisa Collier. That's a pretty good 1-2 tandem to have moving forward. And then for Jessica Shepard, missing a lot of time. How have they replaced her minutes? Because with this Lynx roster coming into the season, it was like, okay, you lose Sylvia Fowles down low. You don't really have someone at this any similar height. Jess Shepard, I believe, is only around 6'3", and after her, there really wasn't a lot. So has it been the two rookies that you mentioned, Dorothy Juhas and Diamond Miller, or how have they tackled this being without her?
They've really relied on Dorky Juhas to step in that role. I think coming in, if ideal situation, they have Jess Shepard in the starting lineup, Dorky Juhas coming off the bench. But they've relied on Dorka to step up and play a huge role right away, and she's done really well. She's even coming off a career high game, against the Sparks, and she's done really well. She does not play like a rookie. She plays like a 2, 3, 4 year vet, or maybe not vet, but 4 year player, 2, 3, 4 year player. So she's been relied upon heavily. And then once maybe she comes out of the game, the Lynx have the ability to go small. They kind of play more so positionless basketball than they probably ever have, or that at least they have in recent history or recent memory. They don't have a Sylvia Fowles in the paint. If they had Jess Shepard would be in the paint more often than not, and then Dorky Juhas would come in and kind of switch with her. But right now they don't, and they're playing 5-out style of play, which is what Nafisa Collier played in college. That's what she prefers on offense. So they're building this offense around her, and Dorky Juhas is a very complementary piece to that, and that's been huge in being able to replace Jess Shepard. Now hopefully Jess can return soon. We're not sure exactly her status. We haven't really heard any updates on her, but I'd anticipate her hopefully coming back sometime soon, and being able to kind of strengthen that depth that Minnesota has.
That's interesting. I assume that you do believe, like, when Jess Shepard does come back, it is a return to the starting lineup. Is that about right?
Yeah, I would say maybe not right away, just because I don't know the scope of her non-COVID illness. I don't know exactly what she's dealing with. I could see her coming back and then maybe coming off the bench a game or two just to kind of get her legs back underneath her, because she has missed a lot of time.
Sure.
But I would say that as she gets comfortable, maybe back into game shape, she was playing like one of the top 2, 3 players on this team, before she got injured or before she went out. So I think that's hard to not put her back in. And that gives Minnesota options. They could play even a little bit bigger if they wanted to. They could slide Dorka and Jess in together. But I think that maybe not in the starting lineup, but at points in the game. But I think eventually, once Jess gets back, maybe give her a couple games, and I would say that she's back in the starting 5.
Yeah, I'm really high on Dorothy Juhas, and just kind of I love her archetype as a player, 6'5", with kind of the mobility and the speed to get around well enough while also having a lot of skill. Big fan of that. But we did talk about the positionless aspect before the season, And I guess from my just remembering what we talked about, I don't feel like you were super high on it. How have you liked that positionless style so far?
I think it gives Minnesota a lot of, options, and that's great. And it just kind of allows them to play free, not have to play any sort of structured offense. They can kind of, play to that aggressiveness that Diamond Miller thrives in, play on that ISO ball that, Fee can kind of thrive in at moments, or kind of run the offense through her, and kind of playing that spread out 5 out style. That does allow. Now Minnesota needs more shooting, which will help with this, but it does allow them to be able to, throw up more threes and get more looks from the perimeter. I think, overall it's worked well right now, or it has worked well. A lot of, their games have been, kind of up and down, fast pace, which matches this style of play, or the style of play fits well into that. So I think it's been good right now. Now if Sylvia Falls was on this team, would I say that? Probably not. But they don't have a player like that, and they're fitting, they're scheming for the team that they have, and I think that for this team, that's a correct way to play this offense, or run this offense.
That's really very interesting. And you mentioned the shooting component, which I did want to get to. Because I looked up and down the numbers, like true shooting, effective field goal percentage, around eighth, ninth, but then that 3 point percentage is 11th in the WNBA. I believe around 33%, or maybe it's like only two players are shooting above 33.3% on this team. Is this team just like not very good at shooting, or is it just still kind of from the slump to start the year?
They're a below average shooting team, I would say,
Yeah.
from three. They have, the likes of maybe Rachel Banham that could help, but now she's hurt. She's out for a couple weeks with a fractured right thumb, which is her shooting hand. So that obviously hurts. She's the best, 3 point shooter on the team, and now she's out for 3-4 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's they just don't really have too many options. They have Kale McBride, which she'll be relied upon heavily to hurt from deep. And you can say, maybe even say Fee. I would even say beyond that, maybe Dorka Juhas is the next best 3 point shooter. So I mean, they just really don't have really that many sharpshooters from deep. Um, but on the other side of things, teams have found that that's the way to beat Minnesota. And so when you have a recipe where you're not making many threes, and a lot of teams are just throwing up a bunch of threes and making most of them, that's where they've come out on the short end more often than not. That's where they're getting blown out. That's when they're losing the games in not so pretty fashion, is because that's the recipe that they have. They allow teams to go off on runs and go light it up from deep. Minnesota is not able to do that. They're not able to counter that, and that's hurt them. So that's something they have to address this offseason, because that's something they needed to address this past offseason and they didn't. And that's been a big issue for this team so far.
So Mitchell, we've gone through like three players, four players with one of them being hurt. Who else do you think rounds out kind of this lineup? If you were to put two more players alongside either Dorka or Jess with Fee and Diamond.
I would say Lindsey Allen, I think you have to keep her in the starting lineup right now. And Kale McBride. So I would say, let's say this team is healthy, fully healthy. I would say it'd be Lindsey Allen, Kale McBride, Diamond Miller, Nafisa Collier, probably Jess Shepard. I think that's the starting five right now. And then you have the likes of Tiffany Mitchell. You have Dorka Juhas coming off the bench. You have, Ariel Powers, if she gets back to fully healthy, could be, a serviceable piece off the bench. Rachel Banham, when she gets back, would be a nice piece. Then you have Bridget Carlton that can still come off the bench and produce. So it's a team that could be deep, and like everybody, they're dealing with injury issues right now. But I would say that starting at point guard, Lindsey Allen is just playing great right now, and I think it would be very tough to take her out. I know Tiffany Mitchell has slid into that role in the past. I think they've kind of taken a step back and reevaluated her position and making her more of an off-ball guard, which is what she's always been. So I would say that it would be, like I said, if I could choose the starting five with a healthy roster, and this isn't a knock on Tiffany Mitchell or Dorka Juhas, because they could easily start. But I'd say it'd be Lindsey Allen, Kayla McBride, Diamond Miller, Nafisa Collier, and Jess Shepard.
Yeah, that point guard spot is something that I'm kind of shocked that I haven't jumped to yet because that was kind of my main concern heading into the season and then the first few games where I wasn't so certain. Lindsey Allen has played a really strong role. How has she really stepped up into that role?
She's just a floor general,
Mm.
which this team hasn't had, outside of her. She's able to just kind of slow things down, control the game, especially for a young team that kind of gets out of control sometimes. She's kind of that calming presence, which is great. She's also stepped up into kind of a leadership role, just kind of being a calming voice, just kind of a steady voice, a steady player. She's not gonna, shine and, throw up, 15 points a night, but she'll probably get 8 assists and 5 points or something
Huh.
like that. So that's she's all that Minnesota's needed right now. And she is what Minnesota's needed to run this offense. Like I said, when they kind of, maybe get out of control, kind of get careless with the ball, Lindsey Allen steps in and kind of calms things down. So she's been great. She's been a distributor. She is a stereotypical distributing point guard, and it's her teammates first, and then it's her.
Hmm.
So that's been something that Minnesota hasn't had outside of her, and that's something that they'll have to get this offseason, wherever that may be, if it's in the draft or free agency or wherever else. If it's via trade, I don't know, but they definitely have to address that this offseason.
Yeah, Lindsey Allen. I mean, it's almost a trend for Minnesota and Cheryl Reeve, from my perspective, where Leja Clarendon came in after the first game of the season. I believe it was maybe 4 games in. Played a big role just a couple of seasons ago. Mariah Jefferson last year, not originally on the team. Lindsey Allen, I don't believe started in the first game of the year, but has really stepped into the role really strongly.
Yeah, I think they've tried a few different things with her being in and out of the lineup, coming off the bench, starting, and I think they've settled on just her being the starter. I think that, she does better with the starting five than she would with the second unit, just because she is kind of a distributor. When you're distributing, you got to have players that make shots, and that's something that the Lynx bench has struggled with a little bit. Um, they need to find a consistent threat in the second unit as well. And I think that's why Tiffany Mitchell makes sense moving back down to the second unit, just because she can be that consistent kind of, presence, and she can go off for, whatever off the bench. So yeah, I would say that, they've switched back and forth and kind of thought things out a little bit this offseason with Lindsey Allen, but I think they're gonna, they're very comfortable with her being the starting guard moving forward.
All right, so I'm cool with that starting lineup. Lindsey Allen kind of running the show. You got Diamond and Fee, Dorka or Jess if Jess is healthier, go in there, and then Taylor McBride. And like we talked about, you feel like this could be a very deep team at full health, just because it is like a glut of pretty talented wins there on out. Tiffany Mitchell, Ariel Powers, to name a couple. My question here, though, is we've mentioned Fee and Diamond as long term pieces for this team. Does Dorota Juhas fit into that category? Does anybody else on this roster fit into that long term look?
Yeah, definitely Dorky Uhas. I would say Fee, Dorky Uhas, Diamond Miller. Um, outside of players that might be there long term, I mean, Kayla McBride won't be there long term, I don't think. But I think she'll be back next year. I don't know how much she has left as far as, what she wants to do or how much she wants to play. I view long term as, 5 years out, and I don't know if Kayla McBride will be around by then. That's not a knock on her. I think like I said, I think she'll be back next year. But those four for sure. Jess Shepard, you could throw her in there. I think she'll be around for a while, which is, great if she can, remain healthy for the Lynx. But outside of that, it's, Minnesota's really kind of some flexibility. Natalie Achonwa will probably come off the books this offseason. At least she's not coming back for the price that the salary that she has. Ariel Powers probably won't be back. You look at, maybe, some of the players off the bench. Do they look at maybe trying to find somebody else for Rachel Bannum's spot? Is Lindsey Allen maybe gone? Do they, bring somebody else in that role? They do have a lot of flexibility. I think what Minnesota can get this offseason will be that'll be key to rounding out this roster. If they have a similar offseason to this past offseason where they strike out, maybe we see a lot of those players return. But if they do, find success and land maybe a top free agent or one of the top free agents in a position of need or in an area of need, then I could see them moving on. But they'll have plenty of cap space this offseason to be able to make some moves around those players that I mentioned that are long-term pieces.
That's an exciting place to be for Minnesota, in my opinion. Kind of before we go star hunting and looking at the offseason, what prototype of player would you like to see this team go out and add if it is that star or even through the draft?
I would say, a player that they could, I, ideally a guard that could shoot, that could do a little bit of distributing and shooting. I think that would be ideal. I don't know if it's attainable, but a player like Jewel Lloyd, I think would be phenomenal. I mean, she is a phenomenal player. Obviously, she's one of the top guards in the league, if one of the top players in the league. But a player like that would fit really well into this team. I think that's what Minnesota has to try and go get. And they whether or not it's Jewel Lloyd, trying to find somebody like that can be a threat at the guard position, but also can be kind of a Lindsey Allen type where you can kind of settle things down, run the offense, distribute the ball. So they need somebody like that, and another player that is no longer in the WNBA, but Lindsey Whalen. They need somebody like a Lindsey Whalen. Cheryl Reeve has said that in the past. They need a Lindsey Whalen running the offense, and that's what they've been trying to find, and they haven't been able to. But once they do, I think this will be a very talented team.
So excuse me because I've kind of jumped the plot here, but do you want to see this team continue and fight up the standings as they go, or would you have liked to see maybe a draft pick come in and be that player?
I think that they're in a win-win situation. If they end up falling out of the playoffs and they get into the lottery, they're probably going to get a good pick. Well, they are going to get a good pick. They're going to get a top 4 pick, but they're probably going to get even better than that. And there's no guarantee that if you get the number 1 pick this year, you're going to get Paige Beckers or Caitlin Clark because there's no guarantee they're coming out this year. They could return to college next season. But even if Minnesota did make the playoffs, let's say they get the 7th or 8th seed, they're going to still get, they're not going to win the first round of the playoffs. They're going to lose the first round of the playoffs if they make the playoffs, just because they're not going to win. Let's say that happens where they're a first round exit, they're still probably going to get a 5-6, spot in the next year's draft, which will still be a good pick, and they have a lot of cap space. So it's kind of a win-win. I think whether if they make the playoffs, that means they're doing something right. They're developing their young talent. They're developing their players and their team, which is a great thing moving forward. If they don't, that means that they struggled, but they're still going to get a good pick. They're still going to get a good building block moving forward. So you could look at it both ways. A lot of people want them to tank and get one of those top picks, but Minnesota can't wait around for that. They can't wait around for the chance to get one of those players because then you're wasting the talent on your team that you have right now. So like I said, it's a win-win, and I think that they'll kind of be in this position the rest of the year where they're at right now. But they might drop a little bit, but I think they'll come back up.
No, that's very fair. I like where you're at with this team. Where we know maybe not right now, but even if they do show some signs of life, that's very positive too. We'll have some fun to close this thing out, Mitchell. You mentioned Jewel Lloyd. Any other targets at that guard spot? Either free agency or we just mentioned the 2 players that you would want to draft at guard. But yeah, who would you go for?
I would say, kind of the top person is, like I mentioned, Jewel Lloyd. I don't know how attainable she is or how available she'll be this offseason, but I would say that, you got to start and you got to push all your chips in with her. That'll be a very key thing. I look at somebody else, like I'm just looking at the list of free agent cards right now. You could look at somebody like, Ariel Atkins. That's a very intriguing option.
All right.
A lot of people are going to say maybe Skylar Diggins-Smith. I don't think that they would look at Skylar. I think there's just too much baggage there. But yeah, you even look at somebody like Kalia Copper. I mean, she's not a point
Yes.
guard, but she is a very talented guard that can kind of do it all. Laney from New York, she will probably be available this offseason. I don't know if Minnesota would have interest in her, but that's another option. And then you can go up and down the list. There's a lot of talented guards, and there's not a lot of teams that really need guards this year or in this offseason. So Minnesota will be in a position to put some money out towards those guards that maybe other teams aren't going to be able to offer. If somebody's looking for money, Minnesota's the option. And I think that they are in a position to put money forth this offseason, and I think guard is going to be the position they do it at. But if I could pick, maybe my top three at the guard spot, I would say it'd be Jewel Lloyd. Beyond that, it'd be Kalia Copper. I really like Ariel Adkins. I think that she would do well in Minnesota. So those are just three names that I personally like, and I think that they could potentially be available this offseason.
We are excited about what Minnesota can do. A lot of flexibility there. I liked all those names. I mean, just thinking about like the Talia Topper, Benijah Laney to go with Diamond Miller and Nafisa Collier. Sounds like a lot of fun to me.
Mm-hmm.
But Mitchell, thank you so much for breaking down this team with me today. I feel good about where they're at, just continuing to climb up the standings. And like you said, with a lot of positive outcomes at the end. Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me on a pro basketball show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a blast, and we'll have to do it again soon.
That we will. Yeah, go ahead and, if you could, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find first and foremost on Twitter. My Twitter handle is M_Hansen13. That's HANSEN. So you can find me on Twitter, and that I usually plug a lot of my work there. I do WNBA stuff for Kana Supis based in Minnesota. Winsider. I do some RotoWire stuff. I work for SportsBettingDime.com too, doing some betting stuff, both WNBA and NBA. And then I have my Hitting the Hardwood podcast. You can find that at Hitting Hardwood. And you can kind of follow me wherever. So I'll be around, and just check me out on Twitter, and I have all that stuff there.
Mitchell, you do it all. Do a great job covering the W, especially. Again, just thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure to follow and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure to follow on Twitter and Instagram at APBShow, and follow me at the AC Willett 22. Thank you so much for tuning in for a pro basketball show. I am Andrew Willett.